In the bustling city of Dallas, where voices often clashed in debates over education reform, two women found themselves at odds in a way that would soon capture public attention. Jasmine Crockett, a fiery and outspoken politician with a reputation for her quick tongue and no-nonsense attitude, stood confidently behind the podium during a packed town hall meeting. Her presence commanded respect, or at least silence, from the audience, but her words that evening would ignite a controversy she hadn't anticipated. Across the room sat Sarah Leavitt, a reserved yet deeply passionate educator who had dedicated nearly 2 decades of her life to teaching underprivileged students. Unlike Jasmine, whose polished demeanor and Ivy League degree often preceded her into any room, Sarah's path to success was less conventional. She had attended a small state university, worked multiple jobs to pay her tuition, and spent years honing her craft in classrooms that lacked basic supplies. Yet, despite these challenges, Sarah had become a beacon of hope for countless children whose futures seemed uncertain. The topic of discussion that night was education reform, a subject close to both women's hearts, but approached from vastly different perspectives. As Jasmine addressed the crowd, her tone shifted when she turned her attention to Sarah, who had been invited to share insights based on her extensive experience as a teacher. "We need leaders in education who understand policy from top to bottom," Jasmine declared, her voice ringing through the auditorium. "But how can we trust someone without the proper credentials? Someone who hasn't walked the halls of our nation's finest institutions?" Her remark drew a mix of reactions. Some attendees chuckled nervously, while others exchanged uneasy glances. For Sarah, sitting just a few feet away, the comment stung more than she cared to admit. She knew her journey hadn't followed the traditional script, but it didn't make her contributions any less valuable. Still, she chose not to respond publicly, instead maintaining her composure and focusing on the task at hand, advocating for better resources for her students. What Jasmine didn't realize was that her words carried far beyond the confines of that room. In today's digital age, sound bites travel fast, and snippets of her critique quickly spread across social media platforms. By the next morning, hashtags like "Respect Educators" and "Dodge Credentials Don't Define" began trending locally.
Many defended Sarah, pointing out the countless hours she had poured into shaping young minds and arguing that real-world experience mattered just as much, if not more, than prestigious degrees. Among those watching the fallout unfold was Marcus
Thompson, one of Sarah's most dedicated students. A high school junior with dreams of becoming a writer, Marcus had always admired his teacher's quiet strength and unwavering belief in her students' potential. When he learned about Jasmine's comments, he felt a surge of frustration, not just for Sarah, but for all teachers who worked tirelessly without receiving the recognition they deserved. Marcus decided he couldn't stay silent. That evening, after finishing his homework, he opened his laptop and began drafting a letter. He wanted to tell the world what Ms. Leavitt meant to him, and why her work transcended the narrow definitions of success that politicians like Jasmine seemed to cling to. The letter flowed effortlessly, filled with anecdotes about late-night tutoring sessions, encouraging words before big exams, and the way Ms. Leavitt made every student feel seen and valued. By the time Marcus finished writing, he felt a sense of pride he hadn't experienced before. He showed the draft to his mother, who read it with tears in her eyes. "You should send this to the newspaper," she urged. Though hesitant at first, Marcus agreed, knowing it might be the only chance he had to amplify his teacher's voice. With Sarah's permission, he submitted the letter to a local publication, unsure of what would come next. As days passed, neither Marcus nor Sarah expected the overwhelming response the letter would receive. It appeared in print just 3 days later, accompanied by a heartfelt introduction from the editor praising its authenticity and insight. Readers were captivated by Marcus's eloquence and the raw emotion behind his words. Social media lit up once again, this time with messages of support for Sarah and calls for greater respect for educators everywhere. Even Jasmine couldn't ignore the growing buzz surrounding the letter. At first, she dismissed it as fleeting praise, assuming it would fade as quickly as it had emerged. But then something unexpected happened. Her niece, a senior in high school, brought the issue home during a family dinner. "Aunt Jasmine, you read this?" she asked, holding up her phone with Marcus's letter displayed on the screen. "This kid is amazing. And honestly, I think you owe Ms. Leavitt an apology." Jasmine froze, caught off guard by her niece's directness. She skimmed the letter, feeling a knot form in her stomach as she realized the depth of her earlier misstep. For the first time, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that she had judged Sarah too harshly, and that her own biases might have clouded her judgment. The thought unsettled her, but it also planted a seed of reflection. That night, unable to sleep, Jasmine replayed the events of the town hall meeting in her mind. She thought about Sarah's calm demeanor in the face of criticism and the way she had chosen grace over retaliation. She thought about Marcus's letter and the undeniable truth it conveyed, that true leadership wasn't defined by where you went to school, but by the lives you touched along the way. Slowly, reluctantly, Jasmine began to see the error of her ways and resolved to make amends. Little did she know this decision would set the stage for a remarkable transformation, not just for herself, but for everyone involved. What started as a moment of conflict was about to evolve into something far greater, a lesson in humility, resilience, and the power of listening to those whose voices are often overlooked. Sarah Leavitt returned home that evening feeling a mix of emotions: humiliation, frustration, and even a tinge of sadness. The weight of Jasmine Crockett's words lingered in her mind like an unwelcome guest. She had always known that her journey wasn't conventional, but she never imagined someone would use it as ammunition to undermine her hard work and dedication. Sitting alone at her kitchen table, Sarah stared blankly at the stack of papers in front of her. Lesson plans, student essays, and resource requests from colleagues. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up a pen, trying to focus on the tasks ahead. But focusing was easier said than done. How could she concentrate when her credibility had been publicly questioned? For years, Sarah had poured her heart into teaching, often working late into the night grading papers or researching new ways to engage her students. She had spent weekends volunteering at community centers, helping kids who struggled with reading or math catch up to their peers. And yet none of that seemed to matter to people like Jasmine, who dismissed her efforts because of where she went to school. As tears welled up in her eyes, Sarah took a deep breath and reminded herself of why she became a teacher in the first place. It wasn't for fame, money, or accolades. It was because she believed in the power of education to change lives. Growing up in a modest household, Sarah understood what it meant to face obstacles. Her parents worked tirelessly to provide for her and her siblings, sacrificing luxuries so they could afford basic necessities. Education had been her ticket out of poverty, and she wanted to give other children the same opportunity. Determined not to let Jasmine's comments break her spirit, Sarah decided to channel her energy into something productive. She opened her laptop and began drafting emails to local organizations, asking for donations to support her classroom. Then she turned her attention to the pile of essays waiting to be graded. Each paper represented hours of effort from her students, many of whom came from challenging backgrounds. Reading their words reminded her of the impact she was making, one child at a time. By the time she finally climbed into bed, exhaustion had replaced her earlier feelings of despair. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Sarah, one of her students was grappling with his own thoughts about the incident. Marcus Thompson, a bright but reserved high school junior, couldn't stop thinking about what had happened at the town hall meeting. He had overheard his mother recounting the details during dinner, her voice tinged with outrage as she described how Jasmine had mocked Ms. Leavitt's education. Marcus clenched his fists under the table, feeling anger bubbling inside him. How dare someone belittle someone as kind and hard-working as Ms. Leavitt? Marcus had always looked up to his teacher. From the moment he stepped into her classroom 2 years ago, he felt seen in a way he never had before. Ms. Leavitt didn't just teach English, she taught life lessons. She encouraged her students to dream big, even when the odds were stacked against them. When Marcus struggled with self-doubt after failing a major test, She stayed after school to tutor him, patiently explaining concepts until he finally grasped them. "You're capable of greatness," she told him one afternoon, her eyes filled with sincerity. Those words stuck with him, fueling his determination to succeed. Now hearing her being ridiculed by someone in a position of power made Marcus feel protective. He couldn't stand idly by while others tore her down. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, an idea began to take shape. What if he wrote something, a letter maybe, to defend Ms. Leavitt? He imagined pouring his thoughts onto paper, sharing stories about how much she had done for him and his classmates. Maybe, just maybe, his words could make a difference. The next morning, Marcus arrived at school early, his backpack slung over one shoulder and a notebook clutched tightly in his hand. He approached Ms. Leavitt's desk before class started, his heart pounding with nervous excitement. "Ms. Leavitt?" he said softly, hoping not to startle her. She looked up from the papers she was grading, her expression softening when she saw him. "Yes, Marcus, is everything okay? I wanted to ask you something," he stammered, suddenly unsure of himself. Taking a deep breath, he continued, "I heard about what happened at the town hall meeting, about what that politician said about you. I want to write something to tell people what you've done for us. Would it be okay if I did that?" Sarah blinked in surprise, momentarily speechless. She hadn't expected this kind of support, especially from one of her quieter students. After a pause, she smiled warmly and nodded. "Of course, Marcus. If you feel strongly about it, I'd be honored. Just promise me you'll write from your heart." Relieved by her response, Marcus spent the rest of the day scribbling notes in the margins of his textbook. During lunch, he sat alone in the library, organizing his thoughts and crafting sentences that captured the essence of Ms. Leavitt's influence. He wrote about the time she stayed late to help him prepare for a debate competition, boosting his confidence when he doubted his abilities. He described how she transformed their dreary classroom into a vibrant space full of posters, books, and motivational quotes. Most importantly, he emphasized the way she treated every student with kindness and respect, regardless of their background or circumstances. By the end of the school day, Marcus had drafted a rough version of his letter. He showed it to Miss Leavitt during her free period, watching anxiously as she read it. Her eyes glistened with tears as she reached the final paragraph. "This is beautiful, Marcus," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for standing up for me, for all of us." Encouraged by her reaction, Marcus revised the letter that evening, polishing each sentence until it shone. With Ms. Leavitt's blessing, he submitted it to the local newspaper the following day, hoping it might spark a conversation about the value of teachers like her. Little did he know, his words would resonate far beyond what either of them could have anticipated. As the days passed, Marcus found himself checking the newspaper's website obsessively, wondering if his letter would ever see the light of day. Meanwhile, Sarah tried to keep her focus on her students, though part of her wondered whether anything would come of Marcus's gesture. Neither of them realized that their actions would soon set off a chain reaction, forcing powerful figures, including Jasmine Crockett, to reconsider their assumptions and listen to voices they had long overlooked. The morning after Marcus submitted his letter to the local newspaper, he woke up with a mix of excitement and nervousness swirling in his stomach. He had poured his heart into those words, but now, as he scrolled through the newspaper's website, on his phone he couldn't help but wonder if anyone would care. Would his voice even matter? Or would it get lost among the countless other stories vying for attention? At school, Marcus tried to act normal, keeping his mind occupied with classes and conversations with friends. But deep down he kept thinking about Ms. Leavitt and how much she deserved recognition. She wasn't just a teacher, she was a lifeline for so many students who felt invisible. If his letter could shine a light on her hard work, then maybe, just maybe, it could inspire others to see teachers like her in a new way. That afternoon, as Marcus walked home from school, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a notification from the newspaper's app. "Your submission has been published." His heart skipped a beat. He opened the link, his eyes scanning the screen eagerly. There it was, his letter printed in full under the headline, Why my teacher deserves respect. The editor had added a brief introduction praising Marcus's courage and insight. Reading it felt surreal, like seeing a piece of himself out in the world for the first time. Over the next few hours, something extraordinary began to happen. Social media platforms lit up with reactions to Marcus's letter. People shared screenshots of the article, tagging friends and family members who were also teachers. Comments poured in, praising both Marcus's eloquence and Ms. Leavitt's dedication. Some readers admitted they had never thought about the challenges faced by educators like Sarah, while others recounted their own experiences with inspiring teachers who had changed their lives. By evening, the hashtag #RespectEducators started trending locally. Parents, students, and even former teachers chimed in, sharing stories that echoed Marcus's message. One parent tweeted, "Teachers like Ms. Leavitt are the backbone of our communities. They deserve more than criticism, they deserve gratitude." Another commenter wrote, "This kid gets it. Real education isn't about fancy degrees, it's about showing up every day for your students." Word spread quickly, and soon, the story reached beyond Dallas. National news outlets picked up the article. Intrigued by the powerful perspective of a high school student defending his teacher against public ridicule, journalists called the newspaper asking for interviews with Marcus and Ms. Leavitt. Reporters showed up at the school, hoping to catch a glimpse of the duo whose story had captured hearts across the country. For Sarah, the sudden attention was overwhelming. At first, she felt uncomfortable being thrust into the spotlight. She had always preferred working quietly behind the scenes, letting her actions speak for themselves. But as messages of support flooded her inbox, from colleagues, parents, and even strangers, she began to realize the significance of what Marcus had done. His letter wasn't just about her. It was about all the unsung heroes in classrooms around the world, fighting daily battles to give their students a brighter future. One of the most touching moments came when a group of her former students surprised her at school. They brought flowers, cards, and homemade gifts, thanking her for believing in them when no one else did. Many of them credited her with helping them graduate, find jobs, or pursue higher education. As they hugged her and told their stories, Sarah struggled to hold back tears. For the first time in days, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself navigating a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, he was proud of what he had accomplished. Seeing people rally around Ms. Leavitt filled him with a sense of pride he hadn't experienced before. On the other hand, the sudden fame made him anxious. Reporters asked him questions he didn't feel prepared to answer, and classmates treated him differently, some with admiration, others with envy. Despite the chaos, Marcus remained grounded, reminding himself why he had written the letter in the first place. Jasmine Crockett, too, couldn't escape the growing momentum of the story. Initially, she dismissed the backlash as fleeting praise for a well-written letter. After all, controversies often blew over quickly, especially in today's fast-paced media landscape. But as the days passed, the criticism grew louder and more persistent. Friends and colleagues urged her to address the situation publicly, warning that ignoring it might damage her reputation further. What truly shook Jasmine, however, was a conversation with her niece during a family dinner. A senior in high school, her niece had always admired Jasmine's confidence and determination. But that evening, she confronted her aunt directly, holding up her phone with Marcus's letter displayed on the screen. "Aunt Jasmine, have you read this?" she asked, her tone sharp yet respectful. "This kid is incredible, and honestly, I think you owe Ms. Leavitt an apology." Jasmine froze, caught off guard by her niece's boldness. She glanced at the letter, skimming its contents as her niece continued. "You talk a lot about fairness and giving everyone a chance, but this feels hypocritical. How can you judge someone's worth based on where they went to school? That's not leadership, that's elitism." Her words struck a nerve, forcing Jasmine to confront the uncomfortable truth. For years, she had prided herself on being a champion for marginalized communities, yet here she was perpetuating the very biases she claimed to oppose. The irony wasn't lost on her. As the room fell silent, Jasmine realized she had two choices: double down on her original stance or admit she was wrong and try to make amends. That night, unable to sleep, Jasmine replayed the events of the town hall meeting in her mind. She thought about Sarah's quiet strength in the face of criticism and Marcus's unwavering loyalty to his teacher. Most of all, she thought about her niece's words, which lingered like a haunting melody. Slowly, reluctantly, Jasmine began to see the error of her ways. She knew apologizing wouldn't erase the harm she had caused, but it might be a step toward healing, for herself, for Sarah, and for everyone watching. The following morning, Jasmine reached out to Sarah privately, sending a heartfelt email expressing regret for her earlier remarks. To her surprise, Sarah responded graciously, thanking her for reaching out and acknowledging the difficulty of admitting fault. Their exchange marked the beginning of a fragile but meaningful reconciliation, one that neither woman could have anticipated just days earlier. As the dust settled, Marcus reflected on everything that had happened. Writing the letter had been an act of defiance, a way to stand up for someone he deeply respected. Yet, in doing so, he had sparked a movement far greater than himself. Teachers, students, and advocates everywhere were using his words to demand respect and recognition for educators. And though Marcus knew the fight was far from over, he took solace in knowing that his voice had made a difference, even if only for a moment. Jasmine Crockett sat at her kitchen table, staring blankly at the email she had just sent to Sarah Leavitt. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she finally clicked send. The act of apologizing wasn't something Jasmine did often or easily, but this time it felt necessary. For days she had wrestled with guilt and doubt, replaying Marcus's letter and her niece's pointed words in her mind. She knew she couldn't undo the damage her comments had caused, but she hoped an apology might be a step toward repairing the rift she had created. To her surprise, Sarah responded within hours. Her reply was measured yet warm, thanking Jasmine for reaching out and acknowledging the courage it must have taken to admit fault. "I appreciate your willingness to listen," Sarah wrote. "We all make mistakes, and what matters most is how we grow from them." Reading those words, Jasmine felt a wave of relief and shame. Here was someone who had every reason to hold a grudge, yet she chose compassion instead. It was humbling, to say the least. Encouraged by Sarah's grace, Jasmine decided to take things a step further. She reached out again, this time inviting both Sarah and Marcus to join her at a statewide education summit happening later that month. The event brought together policymakers, educators, and community leaders to discuss pressing issues facing schools across the state. Though initially hesitant, Sarah agreed after some thought, seeing it as an opportunity to amplify the voices of teachers and students who rarely got a seat at the table. Marcus, too, accepted the invitation, though he admitted feeling nervous about speaking in front of such a large audience. As the date of the summit approached, preparations were underway. Jasmine worked closely with Sarah and Marcus to ensure their perspectives would be highlighted during the discussions. She even arranged for Marcus to deliver a short speech, knowing his voice carried a unique power that could resonate with attendees. For Marcus, the idea of addressing hundreds of people was daunting, but he reminded himself why he had written the letter in the first place. If sharing his story could inspire change, then it was worth stepping outside his comfort zone. The day of the summit arrived, and the venue buzzed with energy. Educators mingled with politicians, parents chatted with activists, and students like Marcus looked around in awe at the diverse crowd gathered under one roof. When Jasmine took the stage to introduce the session on educational equity, she began by acknowledging her own misstep. "A few weeks ago," she said, her voice steady but tinged with emotion, "I made a mistake. I judged someone based on where they went to school rather than the impact they've had on their community. That was wrong, and I'm deeply sorry." Her admission drew murmurs of approval from the audience. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged surprised glances. Jasmine went on to explain how Marcus's letter had opened her eyes to the importance of listening to those whose voices are often overlooked. "Today," she concluded, "we have two incredible individuals here to share their stories. Stories that remind us of the true meaning of leadership and resilience." When Sarah stepped up to speak, The room fell silent. Clutching a small notepad, she shared anecdotes from her years as a teacher, highlighting the challenges faced by educators in underfunded schools. She spoke passionately about the need for equitable resources, better pay for teachers, and greater support for students from marginalized communities. Her words were met with applause, but it was the sincerity in her tone that truly moved the audience. Then came Marcus's turn. As he walked to the podium, his heart raced, but he reminded himself of Ms. Leavitt's advice. Speak from your heart, and people will listen. Taking a deep breath, he began. When I heard someone criticize my teacher for not having the right credentials, he said, his voice trembling slightly, I felt angry, not just for her, but for everyone who works hard without getting the recognition they deserve. Teachers like Ms. Leavitt don't just teach subjects, they teach life lessons. They show us that our circumstances don't define us, that we can dream bigger and achieve more if someone believes in us. Marcus paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. He saw nods of encouragement, smiles of understanding, and even a few tears. Emboldened, he continued, Real leadership isn't about where you come from or what degree you hold. It's about lifting others up, giving them opportunities, and standing by them when times get tough. That's what Ms. Leavitt has done for me and so many others, and that's the kind of leadership we should celebrate. By the time Marcus finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. Attendees rose to their feet, cheering not just for him, but for the message he represented. Even seasoned policymakers wiped away tears, moved by the raw honesty of his words. In that moment, Marcus realized something powerful. His voice mattered. It wasn't just a teenager speaking. It was a call to action, urging society to value educators and invest in the futures of its children. Backstage after the session, Jasmine approached Sarah and Marcus with a mix of admiration and gratitude. Thank you, she said sincerely. Both of you have taught me lessons I won't soon forget. Sarah smiled warmly, while Marcus grinned shyly, still adjusting to the attention. The three of them stood there for a moment, united by a shared goal to create a world where education is accessible, inclusive, and celebrated. The impact of the summit extended far beyond the walls of the conference center. Videos of Marcus's speech went viral online, sparking conversations about the undervalued role of teachers in shaping society. Lawmakers referenced his words during debates on education funding, and advocacy groups used his letter as a rallying cry for policy changes. Schools across the state began organizing events to honor educators, inspired by the example set by Sarah and Marcus. For Jasmine, the experience marked a turning point in her career. She became a vocal advocate for equitable educational opportunities, using her platform to push for reforms that prioritized students and teachers alike. Her newfound perspective earned her respect from colleagues and constituents, proving that admitting fault doesn't weaken a leader, it strengthens them. As for Sarah and Marcus, life returned to its usual rhythm, though nothing felt quite the same. Sarah received countless letters from fellow educators thanking her for representing their struggles, while Marcus found confidence in his ability to effect change. Together, they proved that even the smallest acts of courage can ignite movements far greater than themselves. Though the road ahead remained challenging, the bond forged between these three individuals served as a reminder of what's possible when humility meets determination. Their journey showed that progress isn't achieved through division, but through collaboration, and that sometimes the loudest voices for change come from the quietest places. In the weeks following the statewide education summit, the ripple effects of Marcus's speech and Sarah's advocacy began to spread far beyond what anyone had anticipated. What started as a single act of defiance, a heartfelt letter written by a teenager, had grown into a movement that resonated with people across the country. Social media buzzed with hashtags like Respect Educators and You Real Leadership, while news outlets continued to highlight stories of underappreciated teachers making extraordinary impacts in their communities. The message was clear. It was time to rethink how society valued those who shaped its future. For Jasmine Crockett, the aftermath of the summit forced her to reflect deeply on her own role as a leader. Admitting fault publicly wasn't easy. It never is, but she quickly realized that doing so opened doors she hadn't expected. People respected her willingness to grow and learn, qualities often overlooked in politics. Instead of being dismissed as someone who had made a mistake, Jasmine found herself embraced as a champion for change. Her apology to Sarah and her collaboration with Marcus became case studies in leadership seminars, where experts praised her ability to pivot from criticism toward constructive action. Determined to keep the momentum going, Jasmine threw herself into advocating for policies that supported educators and students alike. She introduced legislation aimed at increasing funding for public schools, particularly those in underserved areas. She also pushed for programs that provided mental health resources for teachers, recognizing the emotional toll their jobs often took. During interviews, she frequently referenced Marcus's words about lifting others up, crediting him and Sarah for teaching her lessons no classroom ever could. Sometimes, she told reporters, the best way to lead is to listen, and I'm still learning. Sarah Leavitt, meanwhile, returned to her classroom with a renewed sense of purpose. Though the spotlight had shifted away from her, the impact of the summit lingered in subtle but meaningful ways. Parents who had previously been disengaged began showing up for parent-teacher conferences, eager to support their children's education. Colleagues approached her with ideas for collaborative projects, inspired by her example of resilience and grace under pressure. Even her students seemed more motivated, perhaps sensing the quiet pride she carried knowing they were part of something bigger than themselves. One afternoon, as Sarah sat grading essays at her desk, a student named Tamika approached her hesitantly. "Ms. Leavitt," Tamika said softly, "can I ask you something?" Sarah looked up, smiling warmly. "Of course, Tamika. What's on your mind?" "Well, I heard about everything that happened with you and that politician. And, I just wanted to say thank you. You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself, so I wrote this." Tamika handed over a folded piece of paper before rushing back to her seat, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Curious, Sarah unfolded the note. It was a poem titled "Why Teachers Matter," filled with vivid imagery and heartfelt gratitude. Reading it brought tears to her eyes, not because it was perfect, though it was impressive, but because it reminded her why she did what she did. Every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every moment of frustration melted away in the face of moments like these. This was why she stayed in teaching despite the challenges. Marcus, too, experienced a transformation in his life. Before writing the letter, he had been content flying under the radar, avoiding attention whenever possible. But now, he discovered a newfound confidence in using his voice to make a difference. Encouraged by the positive response to his speech, he joined the school newspaper, contributing articles that highlighted issues affecting students like overcrowded classrooms and outdated textbooks. His pieces caught the eye of local journalists, some of whom invited him to co-author op-eds for larger publications. The attention didn't stop there. Universities began reaching out to Marcus, offering scholarships and mentorship opportunities. One professor from a prestigious journalism program even offered to guide him through the college application process, impressed by his ability to articulate complex emotions and ideas. For the first time, Marcus allowed himself to dream big, not just for himself but for the countless other students whose voices deserved to be heard. Yet despite all the accolades and opportunities, Marcus remained grounded. He visited Ms. Leavitt regularly after school, sharing updates about his projects and seeking advice on navigating his newfound visibility. Their bond deepened, becoming less teacher-student and more mentor-protege. "You know," Sarah said, one afternoon as they discussed an upcoming article Marcus planned to write, "you're reminding me of why I love teaching. Watching you grow has been one of the greatest joys of my career." "You're the reason I got here," Marcus replied earnestly. "If you hadn't believed in me, none of this would have happened." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Jasmine, carrying a stack of papers and wearing a nervous smile. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, glancing between Sarah and Marcus. When they nodded, she stepped inside, closing the door behind her. I wanted to share something with you both, Jasmine explained, setting the papers on Sarah's desk. They were drafts of proposed bills aimed at improving educational equity, complete with detailed notes and suggestions. I've been working on these for weeks and I wanted your input before I present them to the committee. Your perspectives mean a lot to me. Sarah and Marcus exchanged surprised looks before diving into the documents. Over the next hour, they discussed potential revisions, debated priorities, and shared personal anecdotes that underscored the importance of certain provisions. By the end of the meeting, Jasmine left feeling optimistic, not just about the legislation, but about the power of collaboration. Here were two individuals who had once been strangers, yet together they were helping shape policies that could transform lives. As the months passed, the trio's partnership continued to evolve. Jasmine became a regular presence at Sarah's school, attending fundraisers, volunteering at career fairs, and even guest teaching civics classes. Students warmed to her quickly, appreciating her authenticity and willingness to engage with them on their level. Meanwhile, Sarah and Marcus traveled to nearby cities to speak at conferences and workshops, spreading the message that real leadership starts with listening. Through it all, they remained acutely aware of the broader challenges facing education. Funding disparities persisted, standardized testing remained a contentious issue, and teacher burnout showed no signs of slowing down. Yet they refused to let these obstacles dampen their spirits. If anything, the hurdles only fueled their determination to keep pushing forward. One evening, as the three of them sat together in a cozy cafe downtown, Jasmine raised her coffee cup in a toast. "To unlikely alliances," she said with a grin, "and to proving that change is possible when we work together." "To second chances," Sarah added, raising her own cup. "And to believing in people, even when they don't believe in themselves," Marcus chimed in, his voice steady and confident. As their glasses clinked, a sense of hope filled the air. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew they weren't alone. Together, they had shown that even the smallest acts of courage could spark movements, bridging divides and inspiring others to join the fight. And in doing so, they proved that true leadership isn't about titles or degrees. It's about connection, empathy, and the unwavering belief that everyone deserves a fair shot at success. The months following the statewide education summit felt like a turning point for everyone involved. Jasmine Crockett, Sarah Leavitt, and Marcus Thompson. Each of them had grown in ways they never anticipated, their lives intertwined by a shared journey that began with conflict but ended with collaboration. As they continued to work together, they realized that the lessons they had learned weren't just personal. They were universal truths about resilience, humility, and the power of lifting others up. For Marcus, the experience transformed him from a quiet observer into an outspoken advocate. His newfound confidence spilled over into every aspect of his life. In class, he raised his hand more often, eager to contribute to discussions. On the school newspaper, he tackled tough topics like systemic inequality and mental health awareness, using his platform to give voice to those who felt unheard. Teachers noticed the change in him, praising his maturity and determination. But it wasn't just academics where Marcus excelled. He became a role model for younger students, volunteering as a tutor after school and mentoring kids struggling with self-doubt. One day, while working with a shy 7th grader named Jamal, Marcus found himself echoing Ms. Leavitt's words, "You're capable of greatness, even if you don't see it yet." Hearing himself say those words brought a smile to his face. He finally understood what it meant to pay kindness forward. Marcus's efforts didn't go unnoticed. When scholarship committees reviewed his applications, they were impressed not only by his academic achievements but also by his commitment to making a difference. By spring, he received acceptance letters from several universities, including one of the top journalism programs in the country. The professor who had mentored him earlier offered to continue guiding him through college, ensuring he would have the support he needed to succeed. As graduation approached, Marcus prepared a speech for the ceremony, knowing it was his chance to inspire his peers. Standing on stage in his cap and gown, he looked out at the sea of faces, friends, family, teachers, and took a deep breath. "When I was asked to give this speech," he began, I thought about all the moments that led me here. There were times when I doubted myself, when I wondered if my voice mattered. But then something happened. A teacher believed in me. A politician listened to me. And suddenly I realized we all have the power to create change. He went on to thank Ms. Leavitt for her unwavering support, and Jasmine for showing him that even leaders can grow. Real leadership isn't about being perfect, he said, his voice steady and strong. It's about admitting when you're wrong, learning from your mistakes, and working together to build a better future. And that's exactly what we've done. By the time Marcus finished speaking, the audience erupted into applause. Parents wiped away tears, and students cheered loudly, inspired by his message. Backstage, Sarah hugged him tightly, beaming with pride. "You did it, Marcus," she whispered. "You showed everyone what's possible." For Sarah, the past year had been transformative in its own way. Though she remained committed to teaching, she embraced new opportunities to share her expertise beyond the classroom. She joined panels discussing educational reform, co-authored articles with other educators, and even started a podcast called Lessons from the Front Lines, where she interviewed teachers about their experiences. Her goal was simple: to remind people that behind every policy decision were real human beings whose stories mattered. One episode featured Jasmine, who opened up about her initial misstep and how it had changed her perspective on leadership. "I used to think credentials defined someone's worth," Jasmine admitted during the conversation. "But meeting Sarah and Marcus taught me that true value comes from the impact you have on others. They reminded me why I got into public service: to serve, not to judge." Their partnership extended beyond media appearances. Together, they launched an initiative called Voices for Education, aimed at amplifying the voices of students and teachers in policy discussions. The program included town halls, workshops, and mentorship opportunities, giving participants a chance to engage directly with lawmakers. It quickly gained traction, earning praise from educators and activists alike. Jasmine's transformation was perhaps the most striking. Once known for her sharp tongue and unyielding confidence, she now approached her work with a sense of humility and curiosity. She made it a point to visit classrooms regularly, sitting quietly in the back to observe how policies played out in real-world settings. During these visits, she often reflected on how much she had underestimated teachers like Sarah before. "There's so much I still don't know," she confessed to a colleague one day. "But I'm learning, and that's what matters." Her efforts paid off. Bills she sponsored addressing funding disparities and teacher support passed with bipartisan support, marking significant victories for education reform. At press conferences celebrating these achievements, Jasmine always acknowledged Sarah and Marcus, crediting them for inspiring her to dig deeper and aim higher. "This isn't my success," she told reporters. "It belongs to everyone who refused to stay silent when it mattered most." As the school year drew to a close, the trio gathered once more in Sarah's classroom, surrounded by the familiar hum of laughter and chatter from nearby hallways. They reflected on how far they'd come since that tense town hall meeting, a moment that had seemed insurmountable at the time, but ultimately sparked something extraordinary. "We've come a long way," Jasmine said, smiling as she glanced around the room. "But there's still so much work to do." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Change doesn't happen overnight. It takes persistence, patience, and people willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. And sometimes," Marcus added with a grin, "it starts with a letter." They laughed, the sound filling the space with warmth and camaraderie. Though their paths might diverge in the future, they knew their bond would endure. Together, they had proven that progress wasn't about perfection. It was about connection, about listening to each other, learning from mistakes, and working toward a common goal. As they left the classroom that afternoon, the sun casting golden light across the schoolyard, they carried with them a renewed sense of hope. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they faced it with courage, knowing they weren't alone. Because in the end, the greatest lesson they had learned was this: when people come together, with open hearts and open minds, they can overcome anything. And that's how real change begins.